Heart attacks and strokes are a leading cause of death for African Americans. We urge you, know the symptoms and don't avoid the hospital during this pandemic. Bear thanks the Congressional Black Caucus Foundation for highlighting this important topic.
Hello, I'm Congresswoman Lisa Blunt Rochester, member at large serving the great state of Delaware. While this year has certainly presented challenges, including a global pandemic, I want to thank all of you for tuning in virtually to this CBC ALC session on the future of work. In past years, our focus has really been on things like automation, machine learning, and artificial intelligence. But COVID-19 has actually been the thing that has pushed the future of work to today. So on this panel, I will be joined by experts who will discuss if and how COVID-19 has impacted the future of work. We'll discuss trends, surprises, findings from early research, and big takeaways. And we will also discuss what do we as a country need to do to respond, recommendations for public policymakers, the private sector, and as individuals. As COVID-19 continues, there are still many looming questions and issues that we have to face as a country. Everything from income inequality to the structural and institutional racism that exists in the Black community as well as other communities of color and for other populations. Even the issue of unemployment and education and the gaps that we see need to be addressed. This session is meant to give you real-time solutions, and this panel will help us look at the road to recovery. Joining us on the panel is Al Fitzpaine, the Executive Director of the Future of Work Initiative at the Aspen Institute. Al has been a regular with us, and we are so pleased to have him. In addition, Spencer Overton, the President of the Joint Center for Political and Economic Studies, who has also joined us in the past and brought us incredible and important, relevant and timely information, particularly as it relates to the Black community. And then joining us for the first time is Dr. Karen Kimbrough, LinkedIn Chief Economist, and she will be presenting us with some information that we haven't heard before. So I will begin by turning it over to the panelists to briefly introduce themselves, and then we'll dive in to some of the issues. Number one, what we're seeing, and number two, what can we do? And with that, I will turn it over to our first panelist to present. And if I could hear from we'll start with Al Fitzpaine.
Thanks, Congressman Blunt Rochester. I want to thank you and I want to thank your staff for your continued leadership and all the work that's gone into today's events and the events that have taken place in the previous years. It really goes without saying, but you bring a unique mix of energy and optimism to this topic that I think it really is needed now more than ever. So I wanted to acknowledge that. It's always an honor to be on a panel with Spencer, who, as you noted, his organization is doing groundbreaking and important work in this area. And finally, for me, this is the first time being on a panel with Dr. Kimbrough, and I'm, like you, looking forward to hearing her speak and her thoughts on this topic. So just quickly, I'm the Executive Director of the Aspen Future of Work Initiative. I've been there since 2017. We've been looking at the changing nature of work and what policymakers should be thinking about in terms of solutions. Prior to joining Aspen, I had the privilege of serving in the Obama administration. I started as the Deputy Chief of Staff at Treasury and then ended as the Chief of Staff at the Department of Health and Human Services. And before that, which I think was around 1850, I worked in the House and the Senate for different members working on economic policy. And again, it's a thrill to be part of this panel once again. So I thank you to you and your staff.
Thank you so much, Al. And I think also the intersection between health and the economy is really important for this conversation as well. And we thank you so much for being a member of our Future of Work team, and for me being a member of the Aspen Institute's Future of Work team as the member of Congress that represents us. I'm now going to turn it over for an introduction to Spencer Overton. And Spencer, please introduce yourself.
Yeah, thank you so much, Representative Lisa Blunt Rochester, just for your, as Al mentioned, your vision, your consistent commitment and leadership in terms of the future work. There are so many elected officials who really don't know how to talk about this issue from both sides of the aisle. And you are visionary, you emphasize this, and this is important. It's certainly important to Black communities, but it's also important to our nation. So thank you. I'm certainly thrilled to spend some time today with Al, as well as Dr. Kimbrough. The Joint Center is America's Black think tank. We focus on several issues, but future of work in Black communities is one of the key issues. We've done studies on the future of work in the Black rural South, on training programs, variety of issues. We're also focused a lot right now on COVID-19 and economic issues in Black communities. Some of our work has found that 27% of Black workers are concentrated in just 30 jobs at high risk to automation, and often those jobs where Black workers are not at high risk of automation, like home healthcare workers, et cetera, are lower paying jobs with low benefits. How do we give people more opportunities in terms of good jobs is the big question. We found that COVID-19 has only accelerated the future of work in Black communities. The future of work is now, and I look forward to talking about that today.
Thank you so much, Spencer. Thank you truly for the work that you do. Between these two incredible thought leaders, I have to say I've gained deeper appreciations and understanding for the impact of this issue. And I think, as both of them have said, they said it in a nice way, but I have been diligent, vigilant, like a dog with a bone, to make sure that these issues stay at the forefront, not knowing that we would have a pandemic that would actually push and accelerate, as Spencer mentioned, but also shine a light on the inequalities and the disparities that already existed. With that, I'm going to turn it over to introduce herself, Dr. Kimbrough. She, of course, said you can call her Karen. I said you worked for that recognition, so we will call you Dr. Kimbrough. We'll call you Karen later throughout the conversation, but I'm going to turn it over to you to introduce yourself.
Excellent. Thank you so much. And I would be delighted if you did call me Karen. But to those of you who don't know me, I'm Karen Kimbrough, LinkedIn's chief economist. Before I joined LinkedIn, I spent 10 years at the New York Federal Reserve and many years before that at the World Bank, and also once a long time ago on Capitol Hill as a legislative assistant, fresh out of undergrad. Maybe it was back in 1850, as Al said. I was there too. So at LinkedIn, where I am now, our vision is to create economic activity for every member of the global workforce. And in my role as chief economist here, I'm able to track in real time how the global labor market is evolving, because we have this real-time data from our 700 million members that covers and spans 50 million companies. And we get to see almost 36,000 different job skills that are being highlighted at any moment. So this gives us, has given us, perhaps an early glimpse into how things are evolving. And I'm excited to be here in this conversation to speak with you, to speak on this really esteemed panel about what we're seeing and how COVID has upended really pretty drastically our daily lives and how we work and live. And I want to thank you as well, Congresswoman Lisa Blunt Rochester, for having me here, for being a leading voice on this issue. And I'm really excited to be part of this conversation. Thank you.
Make sure I first say thank you, Karen, so much for your expertise and bringing it to bear for this discussion. As you can see, it's kind of interesting, even while we're doing this taping, I'm pushing buttons, the video went off, then the sound, I was muted. People are still having difficulties even adjusting to this new way of living and working. And I want to make sure that we acknowledge that there are some people who never stopped working, whose jobs we then called essential, which were already always essential. And so we want to acknowledge those individuals who have been making it possible for us to even have our daily lives and our health. Secondly, I also would be remiss if we don't acknowledge those individuals who have contracted COVID-19 and those who have passed away. The numbers are staggering and it impacts every single one of us. And the reason why, again, I am so focused on the future of work is because before this conversation, there was research that Spencer referenced in terms of how Black folks and people of color or people who didn't have the same economic opportunities were being left behind. And our goal was to say nobody should be left behind, and that there are opportunities for us if we plan, if we do it right, if we talk to each other, which is why we even created and we launched earlier this year a Future of Work bipartisan caucus. And at that kickoff, it was standing room only, because everybody from universities to mayors, to advocates, civil rights leaders, to unions, to companies, all know that the future of work is now. And so I want to shift and have just a conversation from your different perspectives about what we have seen as a result of COVID-19 on this discussion about the future of work and what we are actually witnessing in trends, surprises, things that you just didn't expect were going to come out of this. And I'll talk a little bit about it even from the congressional side. So let's see. Let's start with you, Karen. You want to talk to us a little bit about what you've seen? I know you guys get a lot of data. And so I'm curious, and you're a chief economist. And so let's start with you. If you could talk to us a little bit about what you were seeing and experiencing and what insights you can share.
Absolutely. So, one of the things that we're seeing at LinkedIn right now is this just enormous shift in the way people are working, as you said. And two takeaways that I probably would highlight here for you all are, one, just the massive acceleration we're seeing in that trend towards online. Anybody who was providing goods or services in this economy is now doing it online. And if you were needed to move online pre-COVID, it was important to do so. Now it's imperative. So we're seeing this element of digital connectivity at the core of everything people do. And the requirement now is for a digital fluency that just gives workers a passport to switching jobs. So by this, I mean any job now really requires some element of digital literacy, digital fluency. Jobs like graphic designer are requiring people to be familiar with the online software that's relevant for that profession. We're seeing increases in demand for skills around robotics, demand for skills around cloud computing, anything that represents moving towards an online presence. We're also seeing, maybe it's a good thing because it means the future of work is not just digital, but also human. We're also seeing an increase in the demand for interpersonal skills. For sensitivity was one of the fastest growing skills that was sought by employers on our profile. Communication, problem solving. So there is an element of the future of work being pulled forward and accelerated online, but I want to just emphasize that human element of empathy, intuition, creativity, and problem solving is always going to be required. That will never go away. So we're excited that, about this digital move, but we're also aware that there's a digital divide. Not everyone has the same level of skills. And that is deepening the chasm between different groups. One of the things we've also observed, and this is my second point, is just that even if you have the skills, it's not enough. we have our own research that is showing us that even with the same skills, the same credentials, people don't have the same access to opportunity. We have something that we've measured called a network gap that says if you grew up in a certain zip code that's more wealthy, if you went to a top school, if you worked in your first jobs at what we consider like a top company, you can be 10 to 12 times more likely to access opportunity. And that's even with the same skill set. So I would put to you that what we're observing is not just an upheaval of the labor market and a need for digital fluency, which is incredibly important, but also a need to ensure access to opportunity. And that's only been sort of more exposed and deepened by COVID. And one of the things that we're really excited about at LinkedIn is a recent announcement, Microsoft skilling announcement that we made to really try to bring digital skills for free to 25 million people globally. And what this means is the idea that if we can identify jobs that are actually growing, that are requiring skills that are achievable without a four-year degree. People are actually, that we can see in our own data, people have been hired for these jobs without having to go get a four-year degree. And then we can help provide people opportunities for learning these skills online. Then perhaps we're going to start to see an opportunity to get, millions of people by year end an opportunity to upskill themselves. And one of the things that we've observed is that people do want to upskill themselves. They're happy to learn. There's no reluctance on that. We're seeing 5 times the amount of consumption of online learning content on our platform. We're seeing huge interest in working remotely, both by employers that are posting remote jobs and also by job seekers who are looking for remote work. So there is a massive kind of upheaval of search and finding going on our platform. But what's missing, and I'll leave it here because I know other people want to speak, but what's missing is some guideposts and signposts for people to be able to navigate their career transitions. And that's one of the things that we're focused on, is how do you take a very obscure and not transparent market and figure out which way you navigate your way through a labor market when you don't have the network, when you might need just one more skill to get that job. And that's kind of what we're focused on here at LinkedIn.
Thank you so much, Karen. That was really, really very helpful and a good sort of foundation setter. I'm going to shift now to Al. Al, would you talk a little bit about what you're seeing, what you're hearing in the Aspen Institute?
Yeah, thanks for that. To prepare for this conversation, I went back and I looked at what I said the last couple of years, at this same session, and because I wanted to see kind of how much of what we were describing as the future of work has become the present of work, and specifically what long-term trends have become present-day realities. In addition, I did want to anchor my thoughts on how things have changed as a result of the twin pandemics of COVID and racial injustice, and what solutions now feel even more pressing than they did a year ago. And in my just 5 minutes, I just want to make a couple of observations and then happy to add more in the Q&A session. So let me start with technology and automation. And Spencer and I have both spent time trying to understand and articulate the challenges and opportunities that automation presents. And last year, we had a chart that showed, the range of projections in terms of jobs that could be impacted could vary between 10 and 30% of the labor market, and would be concentrated among low-wage workers, people of color, and those that have a high school degree or less. And I guess as we've seen, those same groups have been disproportionately impacted by the economic and health impacts of COVID. In less than 6 months, we now have 30 million people on unemployment insurance, and the number of permanently unemployed people continues to increase. And just for example, in the first week of September, we had over 800,000 people who filed for unemployment insurance, a number that exceeds the worst week of the Great Recession, which I have memories of from my time at the Treasury Department, and a number, just to put it in perspective, that exceeds the entire population of Washington, D.C. And as we know from the Great Recession, once people become long-term unemployed, the likelihood of returning to work drops dramatically. And while the future of work conversation has been focused on disruption, we never anticipated that it would come about as a result of a pandemic, and we had no anticipation that it would occur all at one moment in 2020. So the question, I think, is what can we learn from the conversations we've been having that will help provide answers to you and others who are on the front lines of providing solutions? And how can we help people like those that work in retail, travel, and hospitality who won't be able to return to their previous job? How do we help them find new work? And I guess first, what I would say is, workers who have lost their job need to be able to survive. We need to ensure that we have a stronger safety net, one that catches people rather than letting them fall deeper into crisis. And to me, that means income support that reaches all workers, all types of workers, and that can be provided through unemployment insurance or direct cash assistance, and again, serves as a bridge to a next job or allows people the flexibility to train for their next one. It also means providing health care to those that need it, along with food assistance and protections against eviction. But a stronger safety net, as we've talked about, isn't enough. It also has to, I think what we need now is a moonshot effort at helping people transition to a new job and develop the necessary skills, knowledge, and competencies to do that. And to be clear, education and training is not a silver bullet. It's not the only answer, but it's an important part of the solution. And we know, again, from the Great Recession, that switching jobs or switching industries is very difficult, especially for those that are in their mid-career or are close to retirement. And we know that there are many barriers and challenges that make it difficult to, say, complete a community college program or complete a MOOC offering. So programs will need to be funded and designed to address those barriers. And again, as we've talked about for years in this session, we have seen the level of federal and state investments in education and training decline. And there was urgency around making additional investments before we had 30 million unemployed Americans, but now we've just entered a critical moment where we need to increase our investments in community colleges, career and technical education, Pell Grants, Title IV financial aid, student debt relief, and programs that operate under the WIOA program. And there are proposals that are, I know I'm not supposed to talk about campaigns, but there are campaign proposals that are contemplating large investments in workforce development and free community college, which I think is directionally needed. But there needs to be a job on the other end of a training program. And right now, there are only 5.4 million job openings. So infrastructure bills, green jobs bills, assistance to state and local government, I think all legislation needs to have at its center an understanding of how they are contributing to job creation. Because again, education and training without jobs is never going to be successful. Another long-term challenge, and Dr. Kimbrough touched on this, is the challenges that people have navigating the labor market. And we now have over 700,000 different credentials that exist today. Over 5,000 colleges, over 1,000 community colleges, thousands of nonprofit and for-profit providers. Some have great records of success, some do not. Some work with employers and intentionally prepare people for a specific job, and some do not. The system is so complex, and each decision that people make is so important. And so for this reason, I think we need to kind of accelerate the conversation we were having around investing in helping people navigate what option is best for them. We really cannot rely on the underfunded public workforce system to bear the brunt of this responsibility. So this means, in my mind, we're asking more of employers, community colleges, and job centers to provide this navigation. And even before the pandemic, online education and training options were proliferating. And COVID has supercharged this trend, and this raises the policy imperative that we are ensuring that there's equal access to computers and Wi-Fi connections. And as Secretary King noted at your Bipartisan Future of Work Caucus webinar, there are large access gaps based on race that need to be addressed. And my project, just to give another example, is working in Chicago, where there are neighborhoods where 50% of people do not have a Wi-Fi connection or access to the internet. So there's so much that needs to be done and needs to be done immediately. But again, giving people a computer and internet connection, in my mind, still is not sufficient. right? For older workers or those that haven't grown up on a smartphone, we need to help people overcome, I think, what's sometimes referred to as digital discomfort. We know digital skills are becoming more important and more valuable, but we need really programs that help people overcome the obstacles that limit their ability to do and participate in these types of programs. And it's because you touched on it, Congresswoman, let me also just spend a minute on those who've remained in the workforce. Again, I think this is the other point I would make, which is, pre-pandemic, we talked about a shrinking middle class, wage stagnation, income inequality, and an opportunity gap. And the pandemic is making all of those trends worse unless additional concrete action, not just to remedy where we are today, but again, to rebuild our economies is taken. We've experienced an overdue appreciation for essential workers and the role that they're playing in, again, helping us stay alive. But as you might say, appreciation doesn't pay the bills. We need a new social contract. And we've talked about this for years. For teachers, nurses, delivery drivers, transit workers, public safety workers. And just to give an example, we talked last year about paid leave and the importance of that given changing demographics, changing ways in which people are working. I guess what this crisis has shown us is that we just don't need temporary programs to help provide these types of benefits like paid leave and paid sick leave and healthcare. We really do need permanent programs that help workers and essential workers in particular. I guess my last point is, we are seeing, and again, Dr. Kimbrough touched on this, an increase from 5% of the workforce working remotely to close to 50% today. And obviously, I think that is going to be a permanent, not a temporary change. But that change in and of itself also requires additional reforms, right? If we're going to ask people to work remotely, we're going to need a comprehensive childcare solution for the millions of working parents. We already knew childcare was unaffordable and inaccessible for too many parents. Again, now we have a better understanding of how essential it is, to have childcare to simply do our jobs. So again, the government, again, will be needed to provide a solution that, again, maybe is consistent with what we've done in K through 12 in terms of providing a public system for childcare. So just to summarize, again, I would highlight two essential challenges. One, how do we help a historic and tragic number of people who will need to change jobs and industries and help them do that successfully? And second, how do we improve the quality of work for those who remain in the workforce but are facing the challenges of low pay, income insecurity, lack of healthcare, childcare, or paid leave? In other words, how can we rebuild the economy in a way that provides new opportunities, again, for those that need it, while also beginning to build back the security, stability that workers have the right to expect in today's economy? So thank you for that.
Thank you, Al. I think the word, when you mentioned moonshot, basically everything that you've described, and that's why I fundamentally believe that COVID-19 has really shined a light on these things that we've been talking about. And to your point as well about the fixes that Congress attempted to make in the CARES package and in our Families First coronavirus package, those were things that we talked about, whether it was paid sick time or paid family leave or expanding unemployment insurance to cover gig workers. These are things that we've done for this particular pandemic, but are not long lasting. And it has made us now also see the impact and the need for real structural changes and investments. And so I thank you for also laying another layer on the foundation. And now we're gonna have Spencer bring it home and share with us what you're seeing, what you're hearing, what are some of the big takeaways and trends that you're seeing.
Thank you so much. So many Black workers fell into one of two categories during the pandemic. Many of them either lost their job and faced economic insecurity due to a loss of income and benefits, or they were deemed an essential worker and faced health insecurity due to increased risk of exposure to the virus. So, for example, in April, Black unemployment spiked up to 16.7%. It's almost 11 percentage points higher than the pre-pandemic rates. The most recent data shows that Black unemployment is still about 5 points higher than the national average at 13%. And some key economists project that 32 to 42% of pandemic-induced layoffs will be permanent. In other words, the jobs just aren't coming back, right? Of the frontline workers who were deemed essential and still working, about 1 in 6 are Black workers. Black workers are overrepresented as cashiers, and that was listed as the most at-risk job, right, with low pay and high contact working conditions. And as you know, in addition to that, in terms of, for example, groceries, et cetera, we also have Black folks who are overrepresented in retail, and that sector is really kind of under attack in terms of large malls and department stores filing for bankruptcy, just a significant issue in terms of displacement. Black businesses were also disproportionately affected. From February to April, 42% of Black businesses closed. Most recent data shows a partial rebound for all groups, but the percentage of Black businesses that remain closed is still disproportionately high. Now, Congresswoman, as we look toward the future, it really is important to look back at these past recessions on Black folks here, like the Great Recession, for example. It really revealed the vulnerabilities of Black communities. Although incomes really rebounded relatively quickly for white workers. And you know, this is the period I'm talking about, 2007, 2008, 2009, that period, right? So incomes rebounded for white workers, but Black communities were left behind in terms of earnings, post-secondary attainment, household ownership, net worth, business ownership. 99% of the 11.6 million jobs created in the post-recession economy went to workers with some college education. 72% of those new jobs that were created went to workers with a bachelor's degree or higher, right? And Black folks were simply less likely to have these credentials. So in today's pandemic recession, those folks with a high school diploma or less have the highest unemployment rates here. And even with a bachelor's degree, Black folks have high unemployment rates relative to other folks with bachelor's degrees. So now Al talked a little bit about solutions. I know we'll talk a little bit about that in Q&A. Let me emphasize a couple things. One, I agree with him. I'd only say, like, let's multiply it in terms of Black communities here, right? In terms of everything he said, career pathways, just everything, right? I do want to emphasize a couple issues that are unique. One is student debt. Specifically for Black students who are more likely to borrow at high rates, default on student loans. More long-term student debt relief is needed. There's a huge wealth gap in this country. Educational debt contributes to that. We gotta deal with that issue here. There are a lot of people who are trying to do the right thing. They might be victims of predatory education, for-profit outfits. You know, gotta deal with that, right? Another piece here that we need to deal with and just be frank about. I'm all about credentials. I'm all about degrees, but it's not enough, right? We got to deal with these systemic issues. COVID-19 exposes systemic inequality. Credentials alone aren't going to solve the problem. You know, when we talk about access to social networks, one of the reasons I'm glad that Dr. Kimbrough is on in terms of LinkedIn, what tools can we use to make up for some of those issues in terms of lack of access to social networks, implicit and explicit bias practices in terms of hiring and retention, lack of access to things that you need like transportation, broadband, like Al mentioned here. And so we definitely want folks to have pathways to credentials, high quality in-demand credentials. We just have to acknowledge that, one study shows that typical white household that's headed by someone with only a high school diploma, without a high school diploma, right, has more wealth than the typical Black household headed by someone with a college degree, right? And so while conventional economics says that if we just have skills and credentials, that'll drive things, that's just not enough. It's important, but it's not enough. So I want to leave before we get into discussion just to say, I'm not a big NASCAR person, but someone told me this. They said, it's important to accelerate through the curve, right? So move ahead when you're going around the curve. So right now, everything is slowing down. We're in this space. So as opposed to falling behind in this space, we really need to think about how can we help folks accelerate during this period so that when we get to the other side, we really are building back better and we really do have more equity and equality as opposed to greater disparities.
Wow. Thank you, Spencer. I will tell you, I have heard that same thing. And so I actually follow that. When I go around the curve, I put a little extra gas into it. And I think you just kind of revved me up to, again, why this topic is important and what we know based on everything that you have all said. I mean, the data's out there. Some of the best practices are out there. What we know is that it takes the vision and the will. I mean, we knew in the beginning of this pandemic that what we were facing was so big and so catastrophic and such a magnitude that that's what our response had to be. And it's really interesting because I say to people, particularly when I get like pushback on supporting the expansion of unemployment insurance during this time, that it is interesting that the research that I saw, and it's been over a month, so it could have even changed, but was saying that with those additional supports, back to that safety net, our poverty rate went down, which makes you ask yourself, on a normal circumstances, we have created a system where many people will never succeed. And so the idea of navigators, I mean, Al, when you talked about, as you all know, I was Secretary of Labor in Delaware. I was head of state personnel. I was Urban League CEO, and we focused on education. And the many attempts I can go through, and I worked at Health and Social Services. So I can go through WIN, AFDC, CETA, Manpower. I can name all of these different, WIOA, all of these different attempts to try to create a system that is focused on real time, on demand. What are the jobs that we need to fill with the training programs, with the education programs, and we know we're not there. And I've even had a chance to visit places like Germany and see what they do on apprenticeship programs, look at some of the things that we do here as well. And it is clear that we need both the vision and the will and the push. And so again, that's one of the reasons why I continue to stay on this, because I do believe it's connected to our competitiveness as a country, our health and safety and wellness. It's connected to the economic viability of families and communities, and even our personal safety in our communities. When people don't have hope, they have to resort to things that they maybe wouldn't if they had the right opportunities. So for this conversation, I want to shift now to recommendations. As I mentioned, we know that in Congress over the past couple of months, we passed the CARES Act. which, expanded unemployment insurance, and also allowed for workers who frequently wouldn't have been able to engage because of the gig economy and unemployment. We talked a little bit about telehealth. We were able to put provisions in legislation to expand opportunities for telehealth, and directed the FCC to provide $200 million through COVID-19 for telehealth programs to help healthcare providers, but also to free up their ability to provide this, to get reimbursed for those services, and not just through computer, but through the telephone, because we know everybody doesn't have access to that. In the HEROES Act, we have put money in because we are trying to create these flexible learning environments and also focus on HBCUs and minority serving institutions as well, and looking at broadband that connects to our students. We haven't even spent an amount of time talking at all about the future of work and how it's impacting our schools and our students and our universities. I want to ask you to each, if you could, talk about some things that you feel either we as policymakers in Congress need to focus on, the private sector needs to focus on, or as individuals, what can anybody who's watching this do for themselves? Karen, I was really, you made the point too, that even with the same skills and credentials, we see a disparity. So what can people do? Whether you're me, whether you're a company, whether you're a small business, or whether you're an individual. Yeah. Raise your hand if you want to go first. Okay. Thanks,
I'll go first. Absolutely. It is so important to talk about upskilling, but it's gaslighting people to pretend that that's all they have to do. There are structural barriers. We see it in our own data. When we look across 700 million people and say, you have the same skills, but you don't have the same opportunity. Why? And we can point to zip codes, as I said, we can point to what school you went to. So there's something about your social capital that does give you leverage. I think like an economist about what can we do? And so what my answer would be, the market is not perfect. There are imperfections in this market. There's asymmetric information. Some people know things, other people don't. How do we make the market more perfect? And that gets to how do we help people navigate this market, this labor market, finding a job? What skills do I need? With more information. One of the things that we're really trying to do is make sure that there's more opportunities for online learning. It's a great way for people to get these sort of stackable skills and that they can showcase as a skill and not necessarily as a degree completed at a long-term institution. I think it's important to start to move away from having jobs that require certain degrees and actually just assess people on their skill. If you can come in and do the skill and demonstrate it in a test in your interview, why shouldn't you be eligible? Why should we be ruling out people who don't have a 4-year degree? I think that's one element of it. I think the other element that we need to think about is how do we make transitions that people want to affect in their career more feasible? If you have a certain constellation of skills, but you're in a declining occupation, jobs that aren't growing either in your area or even in the US, what do? Can we help you at LinkedIn, for example, find a similar constellation of skills? Maybe you only need one more skill and then you can transfer yourself to a growing occupation, a career ladder or a career web that has more opportunities and options. And so one of the things that we've been challenging ourselves to do, and we've actually built this, is a tool where you can go online and find out what are the skill adjacencies to your current career. So if you're in a career and you want to either up-level your career for more pay or it's a more sustainable job path, you can put it in and see what skills you need or who in the past historically has made the jump from where you are to a more growing occupation. And so that's just an online tool for information. Right. The last thing I would probably want to just highlight, and Spencer talked to it, Al talked to it, is this idea of resilience, the fact that the pandemic has really exhausted the Black community, the brown community. It's either forced them to work harder or put them all together out of work, as Spencer so well put it. And I think that resilience, first we should commend it, but I think what it means is that we need to really help people where they are and not expect them to be helping themselves without information. And that means that in order to solve the problem that we're all talking about, it's not going to be just policymakers, it's not going to be just large corporations or extremely insightful think tanks doing phenomenal research. It's going to be all three in partnership. And I think we have to expect that companies step up to the plate. And I think that's something that we want to be part of. But you have to expect that we're thinking creatively about solutions where we don't go back to old models, because the old models aren't working.
Yeah.
And we need to disrupt this.
Yeah, well, disruption and innovation are two themes we've also had in our previous conversations. I want to quickly go to Al and Spencer, because I know we only have such a limited amount of time for such a very important topic. So Spencer, you want to go?
Sure, thank you so much. So I think, building on what Karen and Al talked about, this notion of dealing with the immediate needs, the financial support provided by the CARES Act prevented a 33% increase in Black poverty, right? And so as we think about the HEROES Act or comparable relief, that is really important. We definitely need to deal with big picture structural issues, but we can't forget the immediate needs that people have right now. I just point folks to a document we've done, a report called Pandemic Relief Priorities for Black Communities, that's at jointcenter.org, that has a couple of sections on economic issues, and then also a section on broadband and making sure that folks have access to broadband during this time. So dealing with these immediate needs. Karen talked about credentials. I won't go into more. I think it's incredibly important in terms of high quality, in-demand credentials and ensuring people have access to them and have guidance in terms of navigating the maze, as Al talked about. But Congresswoman, I want to focus on this structure that we have failed at. We did a decent job in terms of setting up a legislature, an executive, and a judiciary. But we have not recognized the structural nature of how do we help people enter into a changing economy. The economy this is an old problem, right? When we talk about the Great Migration, right, in terms of folks leaving the South and recognizing there were some other opportunities, or the displacement of people through the automation of cotton and their departure from the South, there was not government support. There was not something to assist people to move to a better and a different life. Obviously slavery was not at issue in terms of Appalachia or the Delta area along the Mississippi from Illinois down to the Gulf, but we do have a similar issue in terms of industries being automated and changing, large populations of people, and us not being deliberate as a nation about how to support people in terms of moving into new opportunities. So we've got to, as opposed to this kind of laissez-faire, everybody's on their own, or we're competing against one another, or even states are competing against one another kind of thing, we've got to figure out how to help people. Another thing we got to do is we got to invest in human beings. One of the problems we've seen is, hey, come here, we've got this tax break, low labor, low taxes, which means we're not investing in education, we're not investing in human beings, right? And we can do it cheaper for you than anywhere else. And as we talk about the new world economy, that's not a way to succeed, right? Having a highly skilled workforce where folks are innovative and they're creative, et cetera, that's the way to success and prosperity and a competitive edge. And that's what we need to focus on in building those systems. So it's not going to be a silver bullet of one tax break or whatever. It is setting up systems so that as the economy changes, we can adapt and help people move into new positions and add value.
Thank you so much, Spencer. And the reality is, even when our forefathers, my grandparents, moved from up south, they then or down south, they then still faced racism. We can talk about some of the historical times when Black Wall Street was burned and when even laws were instituted that did not allow for that upward mobility. And so to your point about intentional,
Yep.
Al, we'll let you get the last word on this question. What do we do?
Yeah, I mean, I talked a little bit about public policies, and again, I think there's a long agenda there that people have talked about during this session. I guess what concerns me is states and cities are going to experience a massive budget crunch, and their ability to help their own people is going to be, unless there's federal assistance to state and localities, massively constrained. And again, the federal government has its set of challenges too, and obviously it's no guarantee that there will be additional legislation, although I think we've talked about why we need it. But that leaves to me employers. Employers have an absolutely central role here in terms of addressing a lot of the issues that both Spencer and Karen have been talking about in terms of identifying the skills that are necessary, not requiring people to go get new education or new training, but again, looking at, I think as Karen mentioned, like skill adjacencies, so you can move from one job to the next without having to take 2 years off to get a community college degree. And, I think we've seen Microsoft was mentioned in their digital skills initiative, and there's other examples, whether it's Amazon and their career choice program or Verizon and their retraining initiative. But I do think there needs to be additional pressure or just a sense of urgency among large employers in particular who have the resources to do this, to help people navigate what again is a historically bad labor market and represents just phenomenal challenge. People are just coming off of the challenges of the Great Recession. And so we cannot, I think, wait around for another 10 years to pass to get back to full employment and a place where wages are finally increasing for workers. That's just not something that I think is we have the time for anymore. And as we saw with the Great Recession, as you mentioned, and I'll just close with this, on the healthcare side, there was a term that was referred to as deaths of despair.
Yes.
Is that so many people lost their job, weren't able to find new work. It resulted in some ways to an opioid crisis, which we don't talk about now, but is still around. And again, for the first time, I think it is in 100 years, we had a decline in life expectancy in our country. That had not happened in over, I think, 100 years. And again, that was a result of the economic consequences of the Great Recession. And so I would say I'm in violent agreement with Spencer as always, and I would also agree with a lot of what Dr. Kimbrough laid out. I think there's a huge ambitious agenda that's needed because again, this moment requires all sectors, whether it's employers, the public sector, the nonprofit sector, to kind of meet this moment and make sure that we're doing everything that we can to help people stay afloat and ultimately thrive. And that should be the goal.
Thank you so much to all of you, so much for your insights and your wisdom. And I also want to thank the CDC, ALC for an incredible opportunity here and our sponsors. I want to close by saying that intention and being intentional is a key, that we have had plenty of programs, but if we focus on the outcomes, we see we have not met the mark. And I always love to think about John Lewis and how he said, keep your eyes on the prize. If the prize is that people thrive and that families are healthy and that we are safe and that people can live their purpose, then we need to keep that vision at the fore and we need to give it everything we have. And so I want to let you know, I am still committed to making sure that this issue is at the forefront. And we know that in times when it's really dark, that's when we've seen transformation. And that's what this time is going to require. It's going to require us to not go back to the way things were, but it's going to require us to do differently and to move forward in a big and bold way. I get pumped about that. As you know, I am a pragmatic optimist. The pragmatism of this is that, as King said, we may have come over in different ships, but we're all in the same boat now. We will either sink or swim together. The optimistic part of me is that we are strong. And I like the African proverb, sticks in a bundle are unbreakable. So let us stick together, let us move forward, let us march on, and let us have a thriving economy and world. Thank you so much.
What kind of a company do I want to work for?
A company that's always kind of trying to change the status quo.
If you have a good idea, you can actually get it done.
That treats their employees as they would their best friend, like human beings.
To have a bigger impact than just what's in it for them.
That is safe for me and for my community.
Giving back to the community, that's what it's all about.
I want a rainbow of ages, of genders, of colors, of ideas.
I want to work for a company where I know that I matter.
A billion boys and girls who are young, gifted, and black, and that's a fact, yeah.